All right, so this will be fall 2024's mini project part two. I may end up opening up the one from last year because it does a pretty good job of following up with what we have here. Um, but we'll go through our next steps within our project. So if you remember where we left off, if we hit print here, we had it to where we were collecting information and we had actually stored it in a my data type thing, just this list of overall information, and it would print out those individual days. We can look at this real quick. Yeah. Sorry. View appearance. There, 200. Go. So we had it where it would spit out the quote day highs for everything going through and getting that in there. So what we want to do though is not necessarily this, but this at least got us exposed to what we want. We want to take that ticker, right? And this would be something like result of YF ticker. And of that result, we wanted to get the info of it. And if you remember, that gave us a big pandas frame that came out of there. And so we wanted very specific information out of there. And in this case, we were looking for the closing price. So for now, let's just look at result.info so we can remember what that looks like. Take these little sections out. Let's see, we should get each one of those. So there we go. We got the results of each one of our tickers. And if we scrolled all the way across, we'd get all sorts of information out of there on the info side. Let's go back to Y Finance here. Wait, we can get back up all the info we wanted. And we had this option of getting this historical data, right? That's really what we were after, because the assignment was to get the last 10 days. So if we come through here, this would be our result. History. And on that history, we were really looking for 10 days. Now that used to work. We're going to try it again here just to see if maybe there was a glitch. And so they no longer take 10D as a valid thing. That's interesting. I wonder why they did that. So let's look at 5D and make sure 5D works. Okay, so, and it did work because nothing came back because we told it not to do anything, right? So let's print hist for the time being, and that should get us back the data frames. There we go. And so we got 5 data frames back out of here. So I may even adjust this to do that. You could also use start and end as options, and we may test that today and see if that helps us out. The problem is that would only work if we knew what today's date was, right? Because when you turn this into us, if you give me 10 days, it won't necessarily be the last 10 days was the goal. So if we do start, let's look at those two options just to see what that would look like. On period was the kicker, right? So to get that, we went to homepage, and under homepage, we went to wiki, and under wiki, we went to our ticker, and under our parameters for history. We had this interval, and these were our different options that allowed in there. Range duration, don't mix with start and end. Again, we only had 5 days as an option there. So we have start and end. Let's go ahead and do that. Note the date time that's in here. You can either pass it in this format, or you can pass in the date time, or you can pass in epoch. Does anybody know what epoch is? What's epoch? Don't be Google searching that. All right, so epoch is every second that has happened since January 1st, 1960, I think is what it is. It's literally just a running count of seconds, everything that's happened since that date. So it's usually a long string of seconds is one way to do that.
Seems arbitrary.
No, that was actually when that was created. So if we look at epoch, it is a period of time in history. There's a reason for that. Let me actually pull up the reason for that. That is the Unix time, the POSIX time. And it's the number of seconds that have happened since 1970. Sorry, not 1960. And you can convert that. So usually you get this Unix timestamp, which is usually what uses it, Unix, Linux. You take that timestamp, convert that to a human date, and you get today's date. All right. POSIX time is every second that's elapsed through there, not counting leap seconds that went through there. Literally speaking, epoch Unix time is 0, but epoch is usually referred to as a synonym of Unix time. Some systems store epoch dates as a 32-bit integer, which might cause problems on January 19th, 2038. And then converts back and forth. So it was a Unix, in this case, Unix Linux timestamp is what we used. Tons of ways to convert. If we scroll down here and see Python, which is right there, you import time, say time.time, and you can get epoch time. All right. So because we know that this is one way to get epoch time, we could just use that example. There's better ones to use, but that'll work. We come up here and say import time, right? And if we say here, our start equals time.time, that will give us our current time, right? So that might make more sense for our end. And then for our start, we want to know what end is minus 10 days worth, basically, right? So to do the minus stuff, it gets a little sketchy because you would have to figure out how many seconds are in 10 days. You guys should be able to figure that out. Let's math, right? And if you don't want to math, this is Python. We don't have to math, right? So it could say equal to our time.time minus, and then what are we going to minus out of there? How do we figure out 10 days ago's worth of seconds? 10 times
864,000 seconds in 10 days.
Okay, you could do that, but what would be the math here? How did you get there? We have 10 days, then back up one. How many hours are in a day?
24 hours.
24 hours times how many minutes are in an hour? 60 times how many seconds? 60, right? So you don't even have to do the math. You just have to tell Python to do the math. That will subtract the number of seconds from time.time, and that would give us 10 days ago in the start time. Make sense? And then, of course, end time is our current time.time. So let's see what happens when we run that. We should get 10. Whoops, don't commit that. That's not what I meant. Run. And float has no attribute timestamp. Okay. Int d time. This would end up be seconds, right? Okay. The idea is that really we just want to use the datetime module is probably the best. So if we go to Python and we look up datetime, this is a better module than time, right? Because we can actually deal with dates. And if we go and look at our ticker, remember we can pass it a date time as opposed to an epoch or even this, right? So in date time, the reason I say that is because we can easily manipulate what we need to do. We can do our time delta, and you can determine the delta of how long it was between certain things. In this case, what 10 days ago was. Now, what's another way for you guys to find some kind of answer like this? We're in 2024. What would you do if you would like to figure out this answer? Hey, there we go. So let's do a little introduction of ChatGPT. And for the purposes of this, say, I want to figure out what 10 days ago was in ChatGPT. Whoops, that's not right. That's a horrible question. In Python. There we go. So we're going to use that datetime module. We're going to import datetime and time delta. Today is going to be datetime.now. And then we have 10 days ago is equal to time delta days equals 10, right? Super, super simple to get that out of there. So we're going to steal those 3 lines of code, apply those into our project. Instead of time, we're going to use datetime. And here was our 10 days ago. And now we can say start time is 10 days ago. Right? And our end time is now. The now, today is what they called it. Okay. Now, the only problem with that is what? We talked about this with finance. This is going to pull the history from 10 days ago.
But it's not business day.
It's not necessarily business days, right? So we may need to tweak this in order to get that out, which is why they used to have period 5 and we could just say 10. It did that calculation for us to get the last 10 results. So one way that we can just care about what we need is to pull how many results? Instead of 10 days ago, how many results should we pull? Yeah, 14, 15, I don't know, pick a number higher than 10, right? So let's try 14. That'll get us through 2 weekends, right? There's 4 days. What if we happen to have a holiday in there? Because we do. Bump it up one, right? So try 15. Once we get that result, we only need to pull the last 10 results, right? So what would we do if we put that in a list? Does anybody remember what we do to a list just to get the last 10? Slice, right? You're right. Trim it, and we do that through a slice. Yep. So let's see what we get out of here. Let's go ahead and run this. Perfect. And if we look at these results, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in that case, right? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That turned out to give us exactly our 10 results. And that's just because of the 2 weekends plus the holiday and anything else in between. So 15 seems to be a decently good number. Okay. All right. Now, if we had more than that, we could trim it down, and we would just trim it based on counting from the end up, right? Because this list of these dates starts at the start date, right? And our end date setting over here to today. Right, but the market's still going. So close wouldn't actually pull today. So whenever I ran this, that's why I need to code it to always pull the last 10 days. If I ran this at midnight tonight, it would actually pull today as the last closing day. Okay. If we look at these headers, we have open, high, dividends, stocks. There's a bunch of these other ones out here. There's a way to look this up. I'm not going to give that to you guys yet because we're going to talk about that pandas, right? What we know is that this is potentially the close. So we want to pull out of this history just the ones that have a key of close. All right. So let's print that. Okay. So now what we got is our timestamp, and we got the closing price that was going through there. Okay. So now that we have those and we have the last 10 there, note that those are a float of 64, D type. It gives us a little more information going out there. Don't necessarily care about the date at this point, right? All we care about is just having 10 data points. And this ends up being a list, and we could actually just roll through each one of those and kind of figure out what's in the list. So we could say something like for date in hist close, right? Then we could probably say, just have our own little history here. 10, let's say last 10 days, what we'll call it. Empty list. And we just want the last 10 of whatever's in here. So we would say something like colon 11, right? That gives us the last 10 out of whatever was in this list. And we go to 11 because we go up to 10, but not including 10 out of there. Okay. That gives us those. And then we will add those to the last 10 days. So last 10 days dot. Does anybody remember how we add that to a list? Pen date, right? So to check and make sure that gives us what we want, let's go ahead and print that result. There we go. And what that gave us was obviously a list for every single one of these. And the only value we really cared about was the actual price in this case. Now, if we wanted to grab the actual date along with the price, then we would have to create a list or a tuple or an array. And that gets us to our NumPy array, right? Where we can actually have a two-dimensional array and set it in there. If we wanted to convert this list to a NumPy array, all we have to do, let's go back out here where I can show you that. So I'm not just telling you that. Let's go to our NumPy documentation. This is if you're creating an array, we want to convert ours from a list. And so we want to, this is also how you can print them. Basic operations. This is again how we can arrange. We basically say NumPy array, and then we pass in the list inside of it, right? So to create our particular one, we would import NumPy as NP. And then down here, we would say my array equals np dot array last 10 days. And that's the list that we're passing in. Now we have a NumPy array here. So if we pretty print the array, let's go ahead and look at that. And that gives us a NumPy array, in which case we have a list of the different values that goes all the way through. Okay. The reason we're doing this is because we wanted to convert this to a NumPy array because we want to be able to graph this stuff. So if we scroll down here, eventually it's going to talk about being able to slice, treat it much like we would do within our side. Stack these together, view. What we really care about is there we go. If we wanted to graph and see what these would look like, we could use what's called Matplot. All right. And that's going to help us print out a bunch of these different ones in order to work with them. So to do that, we essentially just need to point in our plots, each one in there, right? So we first need to get matplotlib. Let's grab this import. We're going to throw that up here at the top. Oops, without the period. And notice we don't have matplot installed. So we need to go down here to our terminal. Make sure we're in the right virtual environment and pip install matplotlib. Again, matplotlib is a library in order for us to do graphs within Python. So let's get that installed. Okay, we installed a new package. What should we do right away? Pip freeze, right? So pip freeze greater than requirements dot text. Oops, not text, but text. Fix that here. There we go. That will update to make sure we got the right thing. We obviously need to delete that one because I hit a typo there, and it should go blue because new things have been added to it. If we look at it, we'll see at this case, matplotlib is now set to 392. So we can use that, go back to our script, and you'll notice the red squiggly went away from the matplotlib part, right? So we're going to import matplotlib of pyplot, and we're going to import that as PLT. Okay. Now, instead of pretty printing this list, we could say PLT dot, and then we can set up how we want to do this. And in this case, we want to just simply plot the array. So PLT dot plot my array. Okay. That will print everything out as a graph for us. So let's just hit run. We'll see what happens. And I'll let you know nothing's going to happen. Okay. When you do plots, we actually have to run the show command in order to show the graph. So plt.show, and that will actually show it up. So let's hit play. And I do that because it's easy to forget the show, and then you're trying to figure out why nothing's running. Okay, what's cool about PyCharm is it allows us to see the chart right here in the system. So we can actually see this chart go through. Now we don't have any good information on this graph, but we can at least see what's happening over the day with XYZ ticker. And notice how we got 4 tickers up here, right? So each one of these is a different one. Now we have no idea what that ticker is, what that graph is for, but we can see that particular stock bouncing around. Let's make sure that we have 10 data points, right? Because we got to make sure we always have 10 data points. So what we could do is come back here to this, and we could say if the lin of last 10 days is equal to 10, then we go ahead and do this. And we could write an else that would say something like print do not have 10 days of data, only have, I'm gonna close this over here on the side, sorry. Plots. We only have, and then we can just plug in the lin of last 10 days. We need to do this as a formatted string, and it would tell us how many we actually have in there, so we could get that out. So let's run this and make sure it works, which we know it does because we have our 10 in there. And we got our plots going across. Remember, the whole point is that you guys need to have at least 10 spots being plotted out here. And it's pretty easy in this because you can usually count them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Now, if we go back and look at our matplotlib and everything else that we can do in there, you can plot out all sorts of different graphs. We're using NumPy and actually to be able to do some of that. So that's pretty cool. We can go look at some of the tutorials and we can do a search here for matplotlib. Actually, it looks like they removed those. That's cool. Let's go out here and we can look at our matplotlib documentation. This is better. And we can see in Python how we would go about that. So we pass it a list. It goes ahead and just plots it out. If we want to set the variable names, we need to set our y-axis and we need to set our x-axis labels going in there. So let's update our system here. And again, we can hit this minus sign to close that. We have plotted our array. We then want to plot our x-axis, right? So that would be our x label. And we need to have some kind of date. If we look at our graphs, let me pull back up our graphs over here on the right. Plots, there we go. So x-axis goes this way, right? Left to right. These would quote be our dates. However, it's not really our dates right now, right? So we could just call these data points something for the time being. On the y-axis, those are our what? Price, right? And we can specifically say that this is our closing price because that's what we were chasing. So let's go ahead and run this again. And now we have a nice little graph that has our closing price and it has our data points down here at the bottom. Now, if we wanted to have data points actually be the dates, we would have to go grab that information from the section that came out. Remember how we did this here? We would have to grab the date and plug it into a list, and we would have to grab our price and plug that into a list. So we'd almost need 2 lists in order to do that.
Put a title on top and just say last 10 days.
There you go, right? And that's fine because for right now, that's what we're wanting to do. In this graph, if you go back and look at the homework assignment, the goal is that you guys grab the last closing price of 5 of your favorite stocks for 10 trading days. You store this information in a list, which we then converted to a NumPy array. That's done. You're going to plot these 5 graphs and feel free to add as much information to the graphs, exploring the documentation. At a minimum, I needed to just show those 10 points, but this is where you can start to learn a little bit. So if you come in here and we wanted to add a title, again, you can use the dot and figure out all the different options you have for this side of it. Turns out title is the actual name of it. So if you do dot title, now this says ticker, that's probably not a bad idea. We could actually grab whatever the ticker is, or we could do a formatted string that would do something like that as well. So we could say the ticker last 10 closing prices, right? And so if we run that, we get something that looks like that. So we can build some pretty cool graphs and just a couple little commands inside Python in order to chart this out and give us some real information. Now, if you guys were actually doing a bunch of chunks of data and you wanted to, crunch this for 100 different tickers, you could build some really cool charts and then display them on a website. Hint, hint, wink, wink. That's kind of where we're leading to, right? If you wanted to adjust this so it didn't start at 0 and then it should start at 1, we could actually change this to dates, right? So something like dates, or days rather, right? So if we change that to days, just out of curiosity. Now, does 0 days make any sense? No, right? And is this go from right to left or left to right? Well, we know our data starts from 10 days ago. So that would almost be 10 days ago leading up to yesterday, right? So what we could say is starting where we have days ago, right? And then over here on these numbers, instead of going from 0 to whatever went over here, we can actually set what those would be. So if we do PLT dot Y scale, see what Y scale is. Log doesn't work there. Let's actually just go to the documentation. It's a good way to learn. Go back out here. There we go. You could do plot to plot 2 different sets of lists, which might be beneficial if we actually had the dates. Then we could just plug in the dates right away, right? For now, we're just going to skip that. What we want to look at is the axes. And so the axes is going to say 0 to 6. That sets this axis. And then the next 2 numbers sets 0 to 20. So let's go ahead and plug it in for us. Oops. And do our axes. And let's actually do that under our labels. Sorry, this is getting super hard now that I got it blown up. There we go. And so what would we want ours to look like? Remember, the first 2 numbers go from left to right. What would we want our numbers to be? 10 to 0, right? So that we know, since we're going opposite days and we called it days ago, we could go 10 to 1 and 0 to what on the Y price? We don't know, right? Right. So we could always do 1,000, but if the price is higher than 1,000, then it goes off the chart. What do you think we could calculate? This is Python, right? So let's do some calculations to figure out what that would be. What do you think is a good way to figure this out?
I feel like if you preset it though, like some of them are going to be kind of squished or bigger.
Right. You don't want to hard code 1,000 here, right?
Yeah.
Because then if your price is 42, your graph's going to look like a flat line. So how could we generate this number on the fly? The what now? Yeah. So we could calculate the max and minimum of our list and figure out where we would want to kind of set those out, right? And maybe tack on a little extra so that it puts it in the graph and doesn't go clear to the edge. So we would need to do that before we actually calculate this out. How would we go about that? So let's say max what? This is our max price, right? So max price is equal to, well, it turns out you can do just that. NumPy will go ahead and calculate the max for you. If you didn't have the function of max, you would have to what with our list? Sort it, right? So we would just have to sort our list. So if we didn't have the fancy NumPy stuff, we have our last 10 days, which is a list, and we would say something like last 10 days equal dot sort, right? What's the problem if we do that here? It sorts it, but what's that really do for our data points? They're no longer in order from the last 10 days, right? It's now sorted by the price. And so our graph is always going to go up. Well, it looks great, but it isn't real life, right? It should be going up and down. So this is, if you guys remember, if we need to make a copy of a list, we would have to do something like import copy. And then down here, we would make a copy of that. So it would be something like max list equals copy dot copy, and we would copy dot copy our last 10 days. And then from there, we could go ahead and max list dot sort. And then once we sort, which one is going to be our max price? Last one in the list. Does anybody remember how we get that last index? Yes. Come on, AI, you're doing all the work for him here. And so we could do the same thing with the minimum too, right? We already have the max list, so we could just set our min price is equal to our max list, right, of 0. Now that gets us our number. The problem is we want to give a little bit of buffer there so that it's showing on the thing. So maybe you just minus 10 on that and plus 10 on this side. See what that ends up looking like. And then since we set those variables, we can set those on this side. So that would be min price. And this one would be our max price, right? So let's at least see what that looks like. Yeah, that's a whole lot better. So now we got graphs that have a little more relevance on the closing price, and we can see actually how many days ago. So the yesterday was the last price ticker here, 10 days ago. Now the only problem is it doesn't go to the 10, right? It starts in. So we need to fudge our x-axis here a little bit to go through there. So to do that, we would change that to what? Probably 0 and 9, or do I go the other way?
You're just offsetting it by one, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you could kind of go there. Basically give it one more option. Is that what we're looking for? The whole point's here that you play with it to get it to look like what you want it to look like. So that's not bad. Now the only problem is now it started grouping by 2s, right? Which doesn't really help us on what we were trying to do there. So let's go to 9 and 0. Something like that that makes more relevance. Okay. There again, because we did convert this to a NumPy array like we did here, there is the possibility. I'm just going to comment this code out for the time being. There we go. Close this. If we wanted to calculate the min and max on this side, I'm just going to steal these two, put those here. We could set this to our myArray dot max. Right. And then we could also set this to myArray dot min. And that should give us the same thing where NumPy has all those things already built into the array for us. Kind of thing. There you go. Now, again, that's going to take it clear to the bottom and clear to the top. So you may want to do something like the plus 10 and minus 10 in order to give it a little buffer. Now, granted, if that stock is $2, that's going to give it a $12 and a $3. You know what I mean? It's going to give it a much bigger flat realm there. For example, at the 400 range, it does that. If we go back to that one, now we got a little bit of a problem because AMC is kind of just staying steady.
Can you just do like plus or minus 20% and round it off or something?
Yeah, so instead of 10s, you could just do 20% or whatever it is, right? So how would that look like? It's a good idea. I like that. So plus basically that my pay, my array dot max times 1.2, right?
Yeah.
That would give us the 20%. And then we would essentially do the same thing from a minus perspective to give us that same number. Let's see what that looks like. It's all right. That gives us 20% either direction. Now notice it pretty much makes everything look flat and level, right? Unless something really jumps throughout the day. So maybe 20% is a little too big. Maybe you want to do 5% or something.
Should they both be max or should the bottom one be min? Or
Yeah, that's a good point too, right? It's a good point. And then it would subtract that. Yep. That's another reason why it looks so goofy when it's doing it. Still kind of 5%-ish.
play with it.
It's not really 5% though, right? So if I take
Yeah, why
this
is it
one,
so high?
oh, you know why? Because it really is that we don't want 1 point. It would just be 0.0. Because we're just subtracting the 1 point. There we go. There we go. So give it a 5% buffer on either side and it kind of auto adjusts for us. That looks pretty good. That's pretty good graphs. Okay, so in our project, let's go back and look at our requirements here. It says save these graphs in a folder called charts. All right. Do not upload these in your project folder. The project should save these when it actually executes. All right. So before we go too much further, let's go ahead and do another commit because we've unfortunately done too much here. We should have done some commits inside of here. So we added matplotlib. And then we converted close costs to a NumPy array. And then created graphs and show them. Let's do that. I don't know. You can put whatever you want in there. Again, make your comments most relevant to you as you're coding through, but be pretty descriptive. So let's go ahead and push that. Okay. And then we want to actually save those as pictures, right? We don't want to go through there. So what we want to do is create a folder over here called charts. All right. Because that's what the homework assignment said. So new directory charts. Okay. And then inside charts, we want to make sure that this does not get added to our Git project. So how do we do that? Does anybody remember? We could put it on the Git ignore, in which case you could edit it here. So instead of .idea, it would be what? Charts and just a slash, and that would go ahead and ignore that folder. If that's done correctly and you hit save and you close Git ignore, notice how charts up here went to kind of a gold color. That tells us that that is not going to get uploaded to GitHub. Another way of doing this, which is a whole lot easier and less chance of you messing it up, is if you come to charts, right click, come down here to Git and go to, you should be able to add to Git ignore. It's already in there because I clicked it, but you can actually tell it to add to Git ignore. And at that point, it will add it automatically to the Git ignore and format it correctly for you. So it's a quick save on that side. Okay, so we have a charts folder, but we're not going to add that to Git ignore. And what we're really wanting is not necessarily the folder to go up there. It's the files inside of it, right? If we say ignore charts, then when your program executes, the problem is it's going to try to download these or it's going to try to save these in a folder called charts. And that's a problem because the charts folder is not created because we didn't upload it in our project. So we either need to have the code in our main file to create the charts folder, or we need to just ignore anything inside of charts. All right. So if we go to our get ignore, we could come in here and do something like *.py, and that would ignore any py files inside of there. You may also, in this case, we're not worried about py files. We're wanting what? PNGs, right? It specifically wanted us to store them as PNG files. So we're going to ignore any PNG file inside of here. So we'll close that. Now this charts is not gold anymore, but when we store PNG files in here, they should show up as gold, and that's how we know things are working like we would expect. So first of all, we got to figure out how to, instead of show, we want to what? Somehow save it out, right? So thank you, Python. If we say save, it comes up with a method of say fig. That sounds right. And if we save the fig that it gave us, save fig, it's going to automatically say, hey, why don't you do that as ticker.png? That sounds pretty cool. Let's do that. So let's go ahead and start that. And now, because we took out PLT show, we should not see the files over here, right? We should see them over here. Now, what problem do I have? It dumped them into the main directory, right? They need to go into the charts folder. So let's go ahead and double check this. And it turns out we got the chart exactly the way we want it. We just need to get it in the right folder. So let's delete these. And so we would need to tweak this to say what? So chart slash, right? And that would dump it into the charts directory underneath. Let's go ahead and run that. Now we see charts has an arrow. We click the down arrow and notice that each one of those is now gold. And the gold means we will not upload this to GitHub. So to check to make sure that's right, let's go ahead and git commit. And we're going to say saved charts as PNG files under charts folder. Push. Push. Okay. If that all went right, if we go out to our GitHub project and we look at this one, which again, I should have one from this fall, and we refresh, where was it pushing it to? I don't have any charts folder. It's odd. Should be pulling charts in. We have our main. Let's go see if we actually have the latest code. It says we have that in here. Let's look under what all changed. We have a charts PNG through there. Okay. Main.py does have it saving out as the correct folder. We have our requirements. So the problem is if we try to run this right now, it's going to crash, right? Because we don't end up having a charts folder. Yep. So in the old videos, that's what I did. So let's just go down that directory. What she said is basically if that folder doesn't exist, we should probably just run a simple little check. If it doesn't exist, go ahead and create it, then go ahead and dump the files in there. That's a good idea. So if you remember from INF601, how would we go about doing that? Okay. Yep. And you could do os.makeDirs, in which case we need to pass the name of it, which would be charts. Right. And if it already exists, it would cause an issue, right? Yeah, so there's an option there of exists, okay, true. Or you could do an if check to say if this path exists, go through. Now that's the OS way. You could use path, right? Path was the newer way of doing the same thing. So let's run this and make sure our code goes as we would expect. Looks like it still ran. Looks like these files are still out there. We should be good to go. Let's go ahead and commit that change. Commit this to say added code to create charts folder. If it does not exist, commit push. Push. Okay, that should take care of any issues that we would have on that side. Let's go back to our homework assignment. So save these graphs. You want to add that folder to your get ignore. We did all of that. In this case, we told it to just specifically ignore the PNG files. There should be a minimum of 5 commits on your project. I think we hit that. We have 7. Should have been saving a lot more than that. I'll be checking out the main branch. Let's make sure we're all on the main branch. We are. Note that there's only one branch currently. Be sure to include the requirements.txt file as a safety precaution. Just go back in here, rerun pip freeze requirements. And as long as that thing does not turn blue, you're safe. Ours turned blue. And it didn't turn blue. So if it actually turned blue, then that means that you installed something you forgot. Push that baby back up there. All right. You should always check that when you get down to this last step. There should be a README file in your project that explains what your project is, how to install the pip requirements, and how to execute the program. Be sure to use our GitHub. So the very last thing you do when all this project's working like we would expect is let's go play with our README file for this one. Close some things down here so we can read. And let's look at it back from the top. So our description is this is what it's going to do, right? Our dependencies we wanted to install here. Let's go ahead and get rid of the getting started part. Actually, that's fine. That's a header above this, right? And we can look at this on our current version. If we go out here to our project, this is what it looks like. So we want to make sure that this flows and does exactly what we would expect to do. We have our description section, getting started section, and we're going to move our way down. This is how we get our dependencies. We don't need an installing, but we probably need an executing program section, right? And so for an executing program section, let's go down here. Let's get rid of this because we're not actually having to install anything. Let's just change this. And how would we normally run a Python file? Python, in this case, main.py, right? And that should run our Python file. And then under help, we could have that, or we could have our authors. We could change something. Let's call this something like output, right? And on our output, this should create 5 graphs and charts for each of the 5 stocks. Okay. So we updated our README. Let's go ahead and push that out. And then once we finish the README, let's go back out here and refresh. And again, you're wanting to make sure this all looks nice and clean the way it's supposed to be. So we have our description, we have our getting started, the dependencies, how they're going to execute the program. And then these should be the 5 graphs that you go through there, right? It should create that out there. Now we could have done that output. Looks like I didn't type that like I intended to. So this should have been the 3 states and this would have been output. That way it gives a nice little description. One thing you could do is come over here to the project and this chart. We could even take a picture of this and then we could upload the picture along with this and have a nice little graphic showing them what would happen when they do it. All right. This program specifically wanted you just to save those graphs. If you wanted to actually still show them to the user while they run your program, you could do that as well. So you could come down here and on the save, you could also do plt.show so that it would show them to the end user. And so if we go ahead and do that, just so it's there, if we run this, it's going to run it inside of our project. So it's going to show up over here. We'll see what that looks like. And it captured this and shows our charts. However, the user is probably not using PyCharm, right? So it'd be good for us to come in and run that from within the terminal. So here, if we run our command, Python main.py, and this is what they would normally see on their screen. It would pop up with this figure. When they close that one, it then brings up the next one and then brings up the next one. It's doing this because of the loop, right? So because we bring it up, and well, this is kind of neat because then you can bring it up. You can, zoom in on different sections if you had a lot of data points, whatever else, go back to the home. You could also go left and right, kind of going through the days, whatever you wanted to do there. Okay. Of course, this is kind of annoying. So this is the reason I don't have you do that, is because they would have to click out of every single one of those. It might make sense to save them, do whatever else. For our purposes, we don't want to necessarily show them. If you're in a program like this, it's kind of slick, but that's not. All right, now we're just writing a basic Python program. All right. Anybody have any questions? Now, this format and how we did this is different than the one of the old video out there. So you can watch the old video. That one's not going to use time delta days and all that because 10 days worked back then. We also did this whole make durs a little bit differently. So this is another way of doing it. Yeah, same way here. We never did 5% before. That's why I like doing this every semester. That's another way of making cool graphs inside of there. Another thing you could do is have the user type in their 5 favorite tickers so that you're not using your tickers in here. Please don't do that for this homework assignment, because then I have to manually go in and type the 5 tickers every single time. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but that just prolongs the grading, right? The whole point was it was supposed to go through your 5 favorite tickers. If you want to do a modified version of this so that somebody types it in, great, I don't care. But for the purposes of this homework, try to keep it the other way so I keep some sanity. Now, the problem with this is I left my tickers.sort. That's fine. That's just going to do it in alphabetical order, right? We don't have to do that. We could take that out if we don't want them in alphabetical order. Okay, so I'm going to take it out so that it just pulls whatever order we had them in. All of this looks good. Let's go ahead and get rid of this whole copy sort and all that, since we're now using the NumPy way of doing things. Let's see, we got my array. It's not a typo. We're fine. What else can we tweak in here to make this look good before we call it a day? That's probably all right. We didn't end up using copy. Let's get rid of that. We're not using pretty print. Let's get rid of the packages we're not using. Thankfully, there again, PyCharm does the beauty of graying it out, which means you're not using it. So let's clean it up a bit. Let's do some pip compliance here, which is just making sure we got at least 2 spaces. That all looks good. If we didn't have this ending line, it's going to give you this little squiggle and say, hey, PEP says you got to have an empty line. So put in an empty line. Basically, just walk through here and make sure everything's compliant as you go. So we got my tickers. There again, it's just complaining. We could have called this my tickers and it would stop complaining. Right? So we fix it. My tickers, stop complaining. Obviously, things like strings like this, those are fine. They're supposed to be that way. So. All right, this all looks good. Let's cut this out as our final version. Final tweaks. Commit and push. Push. Okay, go out here to GitHub, refresh your page, read through this, make sure there's no typos, there's no errors. This isn't still college, so I have to count off for that stuff. All right, so make sure you don't have typos, spelling, grammar, whatever else. Make sure this is nice and clean. Now we have output. This should put it all in the charts folder, 5 different stocks. Okay. This one's pretty basic. We're not doing a whole lot, but that's all we need for this, which means you can now use this README template for all your other projects. As it gets bigger and bigger in your projects, you just add the extra sections inside of there. Okay. The getting started would show you how to pull all that out. There again, you could do fancy things like create a GIF, which is a screen record of you guys doing it, so they would see what to expect on it. You want to get fancy? I'm not opposed to it because it's just good practice for later in your final project. Authors. All right, we forgot to fix our acknowledgements, right? So this doesn't have anything to do with our project. Let's fix that. So one last step. Go back to our README. Any kind of inspiration, code snippets, etc. For the purposes of this, just so you guys can keep it in there, instead of awesome README, let's do something like why finance, because that obviously helped us in this. We just go out to our why finance page. Simple as clicking here. This was our why finance package. Okay. We used matplotlib, right? So let's go grab matplotlibs, and particularly this pyplot. Anything else we used? ChatGPT, yeah. So for ChatGPT, and that's a good point. On this one, what I would want from you is preferably you would log in, right? And if you logged in, you can actually get a link to what you typed in here. Otherwise, you could click on, I happen to have Grammarly installed. This would give me the citation for this if I was in a paper or something. Let's just pretty much use that over here, and we can pull the same info. So for us, we're going to use ChatGPT. We're going to use that here, and we can throw in ChatGPT over here. So we have that. That's fine by me. Get rid of that guy. And I don't think we really used anything else. What I would prefer you have is the actual logs in this side of it. So do I even have one I can pull up? Let me see.
Themselves.
Yeah, so let me see if I can do that in one that doesn't have proprietary information in it. Give me a second here. Okay, this would be good. Let me grab this one here. If you guys actually logged into an account and had it, and say we typed in that same prompt as this other one, just so we get the same output. Of course, I got to make the mistake and put in the Python part. Note that the other one was 4.0 mini, and this is using another realm, right? So this is going in. So here's the thing, like here, it just tells you, right? If we click on the sample, it would actually give us the sample of what we tried to get the code out of. So we could just copy that code and put that out. Could you? There you go. All right, what I'm looking for is this share button up here at the top. You click share and then create link. And then that link that you would get inside of there, just copy the link. That is what I would hope that you would dump here for me. Okay. And all that does is allow me to see the prompts that you did, how you got the information. At that point, I don't consider that cheating whatsoever. That's, you gave the entire history of what you did inside of there. Okay. Let's go ahead and commit one last time. I would encourage you, after you get this all up, that looks good. Again, let's go to our thing, constantly come out here and recheck and make sure this all looks good. So I don't know how many people are like, yep, I submitted it and I forgot to go look at GitHub and make sure that one, it actually pushed, and two, everything works. Check your links, make sure the links tell you where you wanted to go. I closed the whole thing, didn't I? Projects here. Okay, matplotlib, let's open that in another tab. That took us to the right page. And ChatGPT, if I go back to that link, no matter where I'm coming from, I should get this log, right? So even if you have a paid account, don't have a paid account, have the free account with the login, this gives me exactly what you typed in. I can check to see that you guys got everything. Doesn't tell me who you are, right? There's no PII information or anything like that in here. It just tells me the prompts that you put in. That all looks good. That looks good. So next step, come up here to the top, grab this URL, copy, come down here, click on Miniproject 1, create submission, and submit that. Don't upload files, don't add a comment, anything else, just submit that submission. Then when I come out here in the grade book, I should be able to go in here, click, see if anybody's submitted. We have a brave soul. They come out here, I got that one, I should be able to click on it and go. Okay. What I really need to do is I'm going to grab this. I'm going to come into my PyCharm, close this project, get from VCS and dump it in here. All right, I can check out. I'll need to create an interpreter. I will need to do my pip requirements, which it should tell me in the README, and I will follow your README. If you missed a step in the README, I won't grade anything because that's what the README is for, right? Or if you mistyped requirements and I copied and pasted in the mistyped requirements, the file doesn't work. Now, if you mistype requirements and your instructions have the misspelling of requirements and both work, it works. Whatever, it does work that way. It does throw some things off in here. I can tell when you do that. So when I check this out, it's going to say, hey, you have a requirements file. Do you want to preload? It's the equivalent of me typing pip install -r, blah, blah, blah. You guys got any questions on how a mini project works? First one's pretty simple. Now, the second one, we're going to build on that a little bit, and we're going to do some more advanced graphs and things. So if you play with it this week on getting your graphs to look cool, next week's going to be a whole lot easier because you can pretty much copy and paste those codes over to make that work and look cool.
Both the quiz and the mini project are both Sunday.
Yes. Yep.
And the quiz is just covering.
Quiz is like a 5-question quiz covering NumPy, SciPy topics that we talked about. Open book, open note, not a struggle one. Matter of fact, for the sake of it, I'll click on it. They're going to be questions like this. It is 10 questions. What does NumPy stand for? What class are you in? No, I think I took that one out eventually. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.